Okay, so welcome everyone. I want to introduce a really exciting, we've got Valerie Walkerdine, and I'm going to read the bio that we have, and because I think it's important that we know the power of Valerie. So she's a working class academic and artist, and for many years has struggled with being working class in the academy and didn't know what else to do but try and write about it. Valerie's thrilled that the conference exists. She's currently Distinguished Research Professor in the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff University in Wales, and on the Faculty of Trans Art, an artist-led international postgraduate creative studies programme. She's written many books and papers and films, which is not included, and is currently writing a book about class and neoliberalism, using material gathered in previous research projects from the 70s to the 90s. So thank you, Valerie. I want to take one little thing. I got this paper after last year's conference, and it's what's class got to do with it that Valerie published, I think in 2020, at least that's when I've got it anyway. And there's this little part that I think just sums us all up. Valerie says, I am proposing a working class mode of research from which to produce counter narratives. It is this which for me is a specific task for working class students and academics, whether it be encountering pathologizing assumptions or reading research and policy in a different way. Valerie, welcome, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate it. It's really great to be here. And I'm going to try something today that I've called turning the tables on classism. I'm going to refer to notes that I've written because actually I started to think about it in relation to this conference and to talking to people like me, working class academics. And I'm going to be talking about the middle class. And I realized that it was here that I felt comfortable in trying out ideas that I've been thinking about for a long time. And so I also realized yesterday, I just want to say this, that this is the first conference I've ever attended where I realized that nobody could see you and therefore you could spend the whole day in your pajamas. Obviously today I'm actually I've dressed up a bit actually for this presentation. So as Peter said, in 2020 I wrote this article. So today what I'm trying to do really is put my money where my mouth is and sketch out some aspects of this kind of work that I've been thinking about. So just to explain, my background is in the way that psychology meets sociology, that's sometimes called psychosocial studies. And I never really fitted in either of them. But recently I was asked to write a couple of chapters for handbooks, one on neoliberalism, looking at psychoanalytic literature, and the other on class for a handbook of psychosocial studies. So, you know, as I said, the psychosocial is about trying to go beyond the idea that there's a psyche and there's a social and you just put them together, to rethink it in a different way. But in each piece, I was thinking about the existing literature on class in those fields, and there isn't much of it. And I kept getting really cross, really, really cross. So I want to share with you how I came to get so angry and some ideas I'm working with to approach the issues in a different way. So I'm going to start with an idea that I heard talked about quite a lot yesterday, classification. And classification, of course, is a way of looking at the other. And it begins, of course, in the move in industrialization from the towns to the cities, sorry, from the countryside to towns and cities, and the development of industry in the time of liberal governance, so that people are governed through modes of classification. We're not talking about peasants and aristocrats anymore. We're talking about a working class and a bourgeoisie. We're talking about new wealth in the middle and new waged poverty. So the new sciences, for example, sociology and psychology, begin to map these forms of classification and use them to govern. So they classify all kinds of people, areas of towns, spread of crime, poverty, and so forth. So I'm trying to then think about how this bourgeoisie, this new bourgeoisie, fits into this liberal governance through classification. And I want to start by thinking about a very classic study. It's a study by Engels in 1844 of the state of the working class in England. Now, on one level, Engels is mapping the terrible state of work, housing, health, and so forth. It's a political economy and it's a call to socialism. But I want to look at it in a slightly different way. Engels was born into a wealthy German bourgeoisie. His family owned textile mills in Germany and Salford. Engels was radical, and his father sent him to Manchester to work in the offices because he thought that would sort him out. And hence he developed the ideas and the work for the book. Then, to cut a very long story short, he gets together with Marx and writes the Communist Manifesto. Marx's father was a middle-class lawyer and they owned vineyards. They were working in, both of them had a liberal, what we'd call a liberal humanist education. And both of them, as we see, had considerable private wealth. I'm going to some length about this because I want to think about the ways that both of them configure the role of the working class in communism and as a critique of capitalism. So the role of the working class is to rise up against their oppression and exploitation and to make a revolution. To do this, Marx and Engels posit that they must be able to come as what we might call a psychological obstacle. Marx calls it ideology. The ideas of the ruling class are distorted ideas or distorted ways of looking at things that he referred to as a camera obscura. So what's the role of the bourgeoisie? Why do Marx and Engels never analyze their own position? What is this radical bourgeois gaze on the working class? And why and how come they see the problem of exploitation and the terrible lives of the industrial workers who need to see beyond capitalist bourgeois ideas that they were brought up on. I understand that those were important and radical ideas. That's not what I'm questioning. What I'm questioning is the way in which they can sit back and write, and we are the ones who have to make the revolution. So why don't they spend more time on their own greed than attacking working class actors? It may be a bad example to start with, I'm not sure, but that's what came to my mind when I was thinking about this. And I only give it as one example among very, very, very many. But I want to use it because it characterizes that moment of liberal governance and the sense that some problem, which later becomes understood as a pathology, lies with the failure of the working class to see past capitalism and capitalist thinking and the way that capitalism defines them. It seems that only they see past it, but they are born into it. Now, when I was younger, in my 20s, and part of a kind of radical leftism, I was always confused by this, always. I never understood why it was always the middle classes who pontificated about what we should be doing, but only they could somehow see beyond it. But we, and only we, had to act. So I'm trying to think about what I will call, for shorthand, pathologization. There's always something wrong with the working class. And this is usually a failure that has a psychological aspect. By contrast, as we know very well, the middle class in liberalism becomes the norm, the standard, the rational, educated standard by which the working class are judged and found wanting. So it's here in the sense that we see a sense that a set of founding assumptions that are always presented from a middle class perspective are presented as a universal norm. Of course, we must understand that this does make some sense of experiences. As I said, in my 20s, in the 1970s, it really bothered me. The attitude that the left supported the working class was everywhere. And John Lennon's "A Working Class Hero is Something to Be" was very popular. But the ideas of the working class were male manual workers, and it seemed filled with fantasies of them as saviors that I never could make any sense of and didn't fit in with my experience at all. But the space wasn't there, or I didn't have the confidence to say so. I just tried to keep up with the heavy-duty theorizing and radical posturing that I came to understand was central to creating a radical chic middle-class intellectual authority. So of course, we must understand that the bourgeoisie were created historically as a class through industrial capitalism. They were not the nobility. They didn't have inherited wealth. They rose from humbler ranks. And this puts them in a strange position in the middle, striving for wealth education, culture, and fearing the loss of wealth and a return to relative poverty. I want to suggest that this is a key aspect of this middle, the middle in middle class. Has it been studied? Not really, I don't think so. Have they investigated themselves and their will to power, as Foucault put it? No. But they endlessly explain and judge the working class. This, I think, is why our work has to begin from a different point. As Peter's been saying, and you've all been talking about in this wonderful conference, that is a point of our experience, what we know and what we've learned, and trying to turn the tables on what's said. So I want to give some examples from the work that I've been doing and that I had to do for one of these handbook chapters. So I want to ask why there are so few accounts of the working class, of the middle class by the middle class. Why do they never think to analyse themselves? And I put it to you in accounts of sexism and racism. Do we currently operate as these are the fault of women and Black people? Yet, therefore, do we not take apart a classism that is, in effect, the effect of a working class gaze? Why does it seem so extraordinary to ask this simple question? Why do we always have to explain ourselves? Why is there so little work on classism? I'm going to go through some bodies of work now that illustrate and discuss what I'm trying to get at. So the examples I want to give come from this chapter on neoliberalism that I did for this handbook of psychoanalytic political theory. So the first example I want to give you, and this is what really got me very, very, very cross, was a paper that I found that was written by a well-known American professor, and he tries to understand, this is his contribution to the study of neoliberalism, he tries to understand the right-wing politics of his two elderly cleaners. I mean, honestly, he had no shame in writing about this. He describes them as voting against their interests, which he interprets as a defense against their dependency on him and his wife. Can you credit it? This is because, and he makes this assumption, because they were loaned a small amount by the professor and his wife, and they've never repaid it. In addition, while they're cleaning, they play a right-wing shock jock radio station. And sin of sins, they turn over to face down his coffee table book on Obama. Not once does he consider how come they are still having to clean his house when elderly, nor does he think about his wealth, why they may not be able to repay the loan, his patronizing attitude, and his failure to look at his privilege and ability to employ cleaners. He just goes right in there and pathologizes them with all the self-righteousness he can muster. I was so beside myself with anger. But it turned out that this guy was also an author in the handbook. And I had to tone down my rage in the chapter. The second example comes from a UK sociologist, Mike Rostin, who argues again in a piece on neoliberalism that, to cut a long story short, while he blames projections onto poor and vulnerable people that he never calls the working class, of course, he claims, not unlike the previous person, that there's a problem with ordinary people getting angry about the expenses of MPs, but not about the bankers. Why they only get angry about moats and dock houses and not the bankers. So of course, again, it's the same kind of problemizing, pathologizing. Rostin pathologizes this by saying that while poverty can produce diseases, and he names addiction and obesity, these, wait for it, are the effects of poor self-esteem. I mean, crikey. They are so willing to help us out of our pathologies, but never, it seems, to question their right to define us and to see us wanting in relation to a norm of their creation. So, as I said in the paper that I wrote, what I'm concerned about here is what could be understood as a patronizing gaze which fails entirely to consider the defenses of the bourgeoisie itself, formed in the binary logics and dialectics of global capitalism, and which fails to have any engagement with the complex daily dynamics of the lives of the working class. I point out that being in the middle, as Lynn Layton argues, gives anxieties both up and down, to the elite hyper-rich and to the poor working class. I would add that the pathologizing and patronizing gaze is always marshaled. So my strategy had been to attempt to talk about working class lives in a different kind of way. But I wanted to talk to you today about how we might also think about moving beyond an approach that assumes a failure to see us or understand us correctly, but also to think about the ways in which this only exists through the bourgeois ways of thinking through which we are governed. So one of the things that happened in much radical work from the 70s onwards, there was that the economy got completely elided and missed out. So, for example, Althusser in the 1970s wanted to think about our lives and thus what we feel and experience only produced in ideology. The economy, he said, is only important in the last instance, but the last instance never comes. So, in a sense, more and more of this pathologization and the imposition of the norm of middle-class universalism comes into all kinds of theorizing and ways of thinking about things across the political spectrum. So I'm wondering if we don't end up having to explain ourselves to the middle class, and they rarely or never explain themselves or their position and privilege. They just take it for granted. Like the middle class 4-year-old who asked in one of our studies, who asked a window cleaner cleaning their house, asked her mother why the window cleaner got paid, to which her mother replied, so that he can drink beer. This window cleaner on the outside of their home, as they looked out, who apparently only worked for beer money and not to feed his family. So I'm wondering then about our need to understand class better by demanding that the middle class begin to explore the provenance of their classism, their situation in the middle, and their place in regulating us, together with their fears of becoming impoverished, insecure, and dreams of going into the class that they can never belong to, the upper class, and their more mobility into an elite. Shouldn't we be demanding an examination of classism in all its forms? One of the participants in middle-class participants in the study I've just referred to said of class, you can spot it a mile off. Well, what did she spot? Well, I guess we all know what she spotted. But what does it mean to live being so spotted? What does it mean for her to be so clear that there's something to be spotted, seen, and judged? So to finish, I'm trying to think about what a different study of class would look like if we attempt to bring into focus a gaze not on ourselves, but on being classed, classified, to decolonize the gaze on the working class, to ask it to explain itself, not us to continually have to explain ourselves. I'm so incredibly moved by being what is a growing number of working class academics. As some of you will know, when I was a student and young academic, I didn't know anyone. It's for you to take forward a different study of class in all its many fields and the disciplines that you represent. The current situation of neoliberalism is one in which many middle-class people face precarization as never before. but it's also a moment of projecting all the ills of the present onto the working class, from voting patterns to spreading COVID to being irrational. Well, I'm sure you can name just as many as me, if not more. If only the working class would fall into line, they cry, and then all would be well. But surely the complex class dance under neoliberalism produces sets of fantasies, affects, experiences, which constantly cross and recross each other across class. So I just want to finish by saying, let our words be fire. Let us, out of our rage, create a way of turning the gaze on those who perennially evade it. Thank you.
That was knockout, Valerie. I saw you at the Youngstown thing a few weeks ago, and I thought that was powerful. That was absolutely incredible, and thank you. And absolutely, that's what we need to do. And now I want to. There's nothing in the Q&A that I can see, so can people put stuff in the Q&A? But from that first offing now and turning that gaze around, what will it look like, Valerie? What would people do now? We've got 100 people plus here. What can we do immediately? What's the actions that we can take to start this process?
Well, Peter, I think we've already started this process, and you've started this process by having this conference. And do you know, one of the things that really emboldened me was that I'm talking to people like me. And there are things that we can say amongst ourselves that give us strength to actually make the criticisms that some of us might feel more diffident in making in much more mixed panels. I mean, I've been going at this for a long time, and I'm at the end of my career, so it's much easier for me to say this, but it's not always easy. So I think that the more chances we can have to say all these things to each other, then the more we'll become bolder in being able to say what we think. Because after all, the criticisms that I'm making of middle classism is not anything that, it's not that we don't all know it. Of course we do. We all know it. Everybody here knows it. So I think the issue then is how we ourselves gain the confidence to call it out more and to be more on the offensive. And we can only do that by gaining strength from being a body of academics who work together. And that's what's so exciting and wonderful to me about this, because there is now a space. There are spaces, and those spaces, I have no doubt, will grow. So I do want to thank everybody here for coming here and for doing this work.
Thank you. I know everybody's thanking you back. We've got questions, but we've also got 1 minute. So would it be possible, Valerie, you can see the Q&A, I think, that you could type some answers into the people that have asked questions?
Of course.
Because they are important questions, are great questions. The first one that came up was from Nick, and he talked about the 1960s and had there been periods when society was more open to complex and competing accounts of class. And I remember Kit Duval, this very spot last year, well, it was the opening spot last year. She said, well, like, she said, yeah, there's a myth of working class literature from the 1960s, because you start to name them, you talk about Sheila Delaney, you talk about Dave Story, but you run out of it before you get to the end of one set of fingers on one hand. And it becomes like this myth that we always return to. But I think that's a great question though, Richard. And yeah, if we could do that, if you could type those back, it would be fabulous. Just
Okay.
one for us all, because Rachel's asked this. Do you have any advice for working class early careers to find and use their voice? Because I think everybody, early years or long term, or every one of us, what might that look like?
Well, that's why I'm trying to say that we need to find the spaces to come together to find confidence, because you know, I spent a lot of my early career not saying what I wanted to say, or feeling that I had to fit in, or being ashamed, or thinking I wasn't clever enough, all the things that we go through. And so my advice to early career researchers is find other working class early career researchers, find mentors like Oz Oldies, and grow your strength and grow your confidence to speak out and not be silenced in order to remain in the academy.
Thank you. And to do that finding, we've got the chat on the side here. We've also got on Twitter, which gets such a bad press for the horrors and the hate that goes on there. It's also the place that this conference really truly belongs, because it's reliant on this. So that hashtag I've just put in the side there. But we can make positive, good use of these networks and of each other, and this is the way that we go. Valerie, I want to say a massive thank you for opening day 2 and just being so powerful. And it's early in the morning, but I think everybody's now filled with vim and vigor and all those kind of ready to attack this day.
Well, I might go and have a rest. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.